Hello and welcome to Chat GCP, a medical science, clinical research and commercialization podcast, and I'm your host, Charles Beasley. On today's episode, we have a special guest here to share some stories, some wisdom, and some insight from his many years active in these three industries. And that guest today is Sir Ray Avery. Ray has had a career of gigantic proportions, from humble beginnings as a street in the UK to establishing the School of Pharmacology at the University of Auckland Medical School, and the establishment of medical device and pharmaceutical manufacturing plants throughout the developed world. Sir Ray has received a number of recognitions for these works, including in 2010, where he was named the Kiwi Bank New Zealander of the Year and awarded the Sir Peter Blake Leadership Medal. In 2011, he was named the Ernst & Young Social Entrepreneur of the Year, Reader's Digest Most Trusted Person in New Zealand, and he was made a Knight Grand Companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit. More recently, Ray has focused his efforts on his philanthropic works, including the development of medical devices for the developing world, raising awareness around domestic violence issues, and as well as the cultural issues getting in the way of innovation here in New Zealand. On another note, today's episode is brought to you by SAPRO, your clinical trial pathway partner. Every clinical trial is unique, and the most effective solution is to engage with a distinguished and highly experienced project consultant who can tailor your needs and ensure that your trial is delivered on time with the highest integrity and all risks considered. Engaging with SAPRO as your clinical trial pathway partner will keep you and your collaborators on check, ensure your strategic objectives are met, and ultimately ensure that your product is approved as soon as possible. For the small biotech or pharmaceutical company, SAPRO also offers tailored CRO solutions from start to finish with their reputable alliance partners. Check out the links to SAPRO's services in the show notes below. But now, friends, please welcome Sir Ray Avery. I'm really interested to talking with you because you're somewhat of a legend in the wider New Zealand pharmaceutical medical device technology landscape. There's been quite a lot of different projects and different areas of the industry that you've been involved in, and you've been quite active more recently in like societal commentary and that kind of thing, which I think is probably a little bit abstract, but if you look at it objectively, but if you realize the underpinnings of what this podcast is trying to achieve, it's all rolled into one. I mean, you can't have a really exciting industry happening when there are other factors at play pushing it down, so to speak, and we can cover on that in due course. But I wanted to maybe start off with, for those that aren't familiar with your work and your history, right, why don't you give us like a elevator pitch of what's driven you over the course of your career to date? Because obviously someone doesn't have your experience, your expertise, and the awards, and also the titles, without being fundamentally driven for a greater good.
Right. Well, I guess it really started in the orphanages in the UK when I was. My mother beat me unconscious, and I ended up being taken into care. And I spent the first 14 years of my life in so-called care institutions, and they were really brutal institutions. So I had to sort of come up with a strategy for surviving. So I would run away, and I would go up and down the south coast. I was an intelligent street kid because I never actually camped in a doorway. I got onto the train and got books out of the library and read on the way down to Dover, which took about half a day, and then back again. And I could wash in the toilets because it was warm, and there was always a place that was a waiting room in a provincial town which had a coal fire, and I'd go in there at night and with my tea and coffee, and so I had to be innovative day one. It was built into my DNA to survive. And then I think what happened when I got back into the education system, I realised that knowledge was the real currency that could make me successful in life. So I was a good student when I got back into the education system, worked really, really hard. And I had my first business was at the age of 14, where I was working in a fish and chip shop, and every morning we'd have to cut up the chips, and it took a long time. But I worked out if I could steal some nitrogen from the laboratory at the school, I could make these bags filled of nitrogen-sparred chips and sell them to them. So my mates and I had this side business going. So I've always been an entrepreneur and trying to find those angles. But then what happened was I actually started life as an agricultural research scientist in the UK, worked for Shell Research, travelling around Europe and drinking lots of red wine and looking at weed killers and all those things. Mm. And when I came to New Zealand 50 years ago, almost to the day, it was an agricultural country, and I said, I've got all these skills, I know about the Hill reaction of photosynthesis, and I can do all these things. And they said, well, actually, we just measure the cows, how much they poop, and there's not really a lot of science going on at that time. So I got approached by a friend of mine, and he said, look, you're a scientist. Why don't you? We need somebody to set up the Department of Clinical Pharmacology at the Auckland Medical School. And I had no knowledge about pharmaceuticals at all, but I had a good science background, so I said, well, I'll as long as there's a professor there that knows about pharmacology, I'll do the teaching labs and sort it all out. And that started me on a career in pharmaceutical chemistry. So then I got headhunted by Graham Douglas, who wanted me to set up the manufacturing division for Douglas, and then we became the fastest growing and the largest privately owned healthcare provider in the Asia Pacific region. And then I left there, and I'd learned a lot about building pharmaceutical plants. And so I went and started a company called the Kaizen Group, and for the next 20 years, we've been going around Africa and Asia building hospitals and pharmaceutical manufacturing premises using the knowledge that we had. And then I met Fred Hollows, and that he was a eye surgeon, and he sent me off to Eritrea in North Africa, and that country was munted. It was the 30-year War of Independence, and I had to build a plant there. It was near impossible. We managed to do it, and then I built another one in Nepal, and right now I'm building probably the world's largest intraocular lens laboratory in Nepal, which will be manufacturing about 2 million lenses a year. So it still continues. And going on to your point about the social media commentary, I know that I've probably got about 3,600 days left to live. And there's a lot of knowledge in here, and I want to give that over to other people so that that knowledge isn't lost. So I spend a lot of time mentoring young people who have got an interest in science or making a difference.
Yeah, I mean, wow. I mean, that's a lot to lots to cover. So the Kaizen Group, so that started out as to set up manufacturing in third world countries.
Well, what we did at Douglas, we learnt how to make things cheaper and better by designing quality into the building as well as the equipment. And with that knowledge, I was able to go into other countries in developing the world and get them upskilled to make better products. And more importantly, a large amount of what we do is actually getting them certified so that they're world class, approved by the FDA or TGA. So, and I wasn't married at that stage, so I had a team of about 20 technicians, and we were like the wild bunch. We'd all go to the airport with our big bags and then get off and start designing and building a plant. And we had a rule that nobody could go to bed before 9 o'clock because in these countries the lights generally go out at 9 and everything shuts down. So we'd all be drinking beers until 9 o'clock and then having an excuse to go to bed. But it was a great time in my life because I had a great team of guys. Many of them have gone on to start their own companies. And then I met my wife in Nepal about 25 years ago, and we got married and we got 2 lovely kids. So that meant that I couldn't go on my my big building construction things anymore.
Yeah, because if I look through the awards that you've won over the years, there's a somewhat of a drop off after 2011, and does that coincide with when you settled down and started your family?
Yes, because I hadn't. I'd never thought that I would, because of what had happened to me as a child, I was always very fearful of having a relationship that might go wrong. Whilst I had a lot of, I always say to people, I did a lot of due diligence before I found my wife. But when I found my wife, I wasn't even looking, and I had stopped looking because I was always working on these plants, and the only women that you would find in a developing country setting were usually nuns. So I'd given up. But what I really am passionate about is making sure that of those 3,600 days that I've got left, that my children are really the focus of those days. So when they get up in the morning, I'm the first one to give them their coffee in bed, and I every time they come home, I do something stupid, whether I put a tea towel on my head or something, and to make them laugh. So I just want them to remember Dad as that guy. One of the most beautiful things that actually happened to me recently was we went up to Nepal, and I was going to get a cataract operation done. So I thought nothing better than having one of my own lenses put in. So Dr. Reed put the lenses in, and we had a big party in the laboratory, and probably about 20 of the original staff were still there, and it was a very emotional event, and some of them cried when they saw me again after pretty much 30 years. And it was very humbling, and that they always say namaste, and they've got a particular way of giving you a gift, in the sense they say, you are actually a god. So you are our god. And so they gave me all these accolades. And then as we were going away in the ute, my eldest daughter, Amelia, did the best thing that anybody could ever do for me. And she leant forward, tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Good on you, dude." and you can't get any better than that. So I said, she's my friend, and I'm not her dad, kind of thing.
Yeah. It's a remarkable transition from being, just like a standalone adult. Maybe you're married, maybe you're not, to having a family. Your perspectives really change. Your priorities shift. Your values change. Yeah. And I've got a 3-year-old daughter. And I've found that I've realised that now, once you have a child, it's almost like you're just the caretaker for the next generation. You're the caretaker. You're the gardener to make sure that the beautiful garden is well taken care of, productive for the next generation. And that's part of why, in my small way, I'm doing this podcast, because I want to take care of the garden as much as I can, and that right now that garden is the clinical trials and medical science and commercialization industry, and just support and hopefully move the needle a little bit, get people excited about it and interested in it. So that's such a nice story. I think I heard someone say that if the coolest thing that you can have when your kids are older than 18 is that they want to be around you. I definitely hope I don't screw up so badly that's the case for me in 15 more years. No, I'll tell you, I think you'll be fine. You're the right thinking kind of person. So, but you do have to kind of acknowledge that. There's a wonderful advert for a particular expensive watch, and it says you don't really own that watch. You're just holding on to it to give to the next generation, with that in mind, I've already done all of those things with my children. So some of the things that I saw as being pressures, I've given them to them now, because I don't want them to run out of gas and not be able to say the things that I want to say to them. So we have very adult conversations with our girls, and they're actually brilliant friends. Yeah. How old are your children? Sorry.
14 and 15. They're going on... Both
in the teenage years.
Well, but they're both going on 30 or 35 in the way that they see the world, and the way that they... and my eldest daughter was born on the day after my birthday, and she's a mini-me. She's just absolutely... She writes code, makes her own... engineering projects, and wins all these awards because she's just fascinated by life, So we have great conversations about science and so on. My other one is probably going to be a pole dancer, but she loves dance, and she's not particularly interested in academics. But they all come pre-programmed,
They do, don't they? Yeah. Almost you can kind of tell what they're going to be like when they're in utero, and they're our only child at the moment. was bouncing around from basically as soon as my wife could feel her in the tummy, and has not changed. There is no off switch with that child unless she's inconsolable or abjectly tired. She just runs at full noise all the time. Yeah, it's really interesting. But so you mentioned earlier that you had almost had like that entrepreneurial spark way back when. Is that something that's like you think that's pre-programmed as well? That's like a thing you come primed, ready to go out the gate, or can it be learnt and nurtured?
Well, it's an interesting conversation in that when we were doing research into some of the germination profiles of different plants, what we found was that we tried to find out why did a particular bluebell always germinate at the same time of the year. Was it due to temperature? Was it due to gravity or something? So we took all of those things away from it. We put it in a centrifuge so it didn't know what, and we changed the temperatures. And what we found out was there was a genetic messaging built into it. And if you believe that, then you might also say there's possibly the same thing for a human, that you come with this. And if you looked at my daughter and myself, you'd have to say that there's striking similarities in what we do, and also if my daughter and I are blessed with having clown's feet because they stick out like that, and she's got big calves like me. So if you say that physiologically she's got these genetic things that me, the other one's completely different.
Right.
But if she can have those physiological things, then it would be seemingly that if you had your polysomes just in sync, that you would also get DNA transferred to or these characteristics that are actually make what your character is like. And maybe my father, for instance, was in prison in Poland for 5 years. He was one of the British Expeditionary Force, and somehow he managed to survive, whereas most of his contemporaries didn't. And so maybe there was a little bit of that genetic programming, because I didn't start off with a good life. There was no support, so I had to work out how to look after myself, and that certainly built resilience, I think, and the ability to adapt. And also, one of the things that we would come across in the developing country setting is that something would fail, and we'd all have a meeting around the table, and somebody would say, look, it's completely buggered, we can't fix it. And I would say, okay, it's broken, so how are we going to fix it? You just change the argument, and then people actually get more interested in looking at it from a different lens.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say if you have big calves, you're more likely to be entrepreneurial, but maybe. That's really interesting. No, I definitely think that people are wired certain ways. I've got two younger brothers.
Right.
I am by far and away the black sheep of my family. Right. My parents are very artistic, right. Actors, dancers, that kind of jazz, performers. My two younger brothers, professional musicians based out of New York.
All right.
Pursuing their dreams in the Big Apple. Doing very well, I might add. But then there's little old me who loves science and loves the more nitty gritty side of things. So I did a lot of music growing up, but it just wasn't something that I could connect with on like a base level the way that my brothers do. I often say that they have something within them that has to come out through music. Yeah. And I imagine it's the same with like entrepreneurial pursuits. There's something that you have within you that you just you see an opportunity and you just have to address it or head towards it. And some people are like that, some people aren't. I
know. Well, it's true. I mean, a lot of my knowledge base was from what I call found science. So I would pull, I remember the first time I discovered electricity, there was a little Osram light bulb at the side of the bed in the orphanage, and when I undid it, the light went off. And so it was clear to me that the thing that was causing this light to go on was not inside the bulb, but down inside. And I put my fingers down, and I was electrocuted, and I discovered electricity. And then I would pull the alarm clock apart to see how it worked. No, I had no intention of putting it back together again. I just wanted to understand how things worked. And then once you've got that knowledge, you can apply it. And now it's become much more critical. And I think that my two daughters have been a kind of focusing lens that have made a sense of urgency to try and use all this knowledge to make the world a better place, particularly in terms of making healthcare accessible to the poorest of the poor. So by the time my eldest daughter is my age, there'll be at least 100 million people who've got one of my lenses in their eye. So that's a good legacy to have.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's through the Fred Hollows Foundation.
Yeah. That's for the laboratories that we built in Eritrea and Nepal.
Yeah. Wow, that's remarkable. So it's just those two laboratories?
No, well, what we did was that's not just those laboratories, because when I invented the technology, I gave the foundation the opportunity to patent it if they wanted to do, but we all agreed to make it open source, because then the scale would be much larger. Mm-hmm. So then all the generic manufacturers could use the technology. Mm-hmm. So then we went on to India and built 2 more plants in India, and then the larger multinational companies basically just used the same technology. So all we did was make it automatic rather than a very manual process.
I see. Yeah, so it's those like process gains that result in a massive decrease in production cost.
Well, the reject rate before we did this technology was round about 38 to 40% reject lenses, and now it's probably less than 1%.
Why do you think it took like a foundation and someone like yourself to make that a reality in these third world countries?
Well, there's two things really. Firstly is I think there's a general belief that developing countries don't have the skill sets to be able to make high quality products. And if you go to India, there's a company called SAPRO, which is actually the largest drug manufacturer by volume in the world. And they're really far way in advance of any of the American companies in the way that they... And part of it is... what I love about working in these countries is when you get a large organisation together, what often happens is you get tribes, you get production, and then you get quality assurance, and they're natural enemies. And in the first world country, often they spend all their time fighting each other. Whereas in developing countries, because of their culture and the way that they see... A good example is, I remember one of the... quality assurance staff was going downstairs, and she put a lab coat on after just coming out of lunch, and her hair was caught under a lab coat, and the production manager reached forward and just pulled it out gently for her and patted it. And you can't do that in our country for all sorts of reasons, But they look after each other, and they might be talking to you, and if your tie's a bit skew, they'll put your tie up for you, So there's a lot more love and camaraderie, and it's therefore easier to get SOPs compliance in those countries often than it is in a developed world country. And they're also very happy to see you. Because nobody usually goes there.
Sure.
So when we built the first plant in Eritrea, there was nothing there, and I was literally making the walls to build the plant. There was no technology. I said, do you have a thing like a roller for rolling the paint on the walls? And they said, oh yes, we have something. And they produced this thing that looked like a Scotty dog with a broom up its bottom, and it put more paint over the ceiling and over them than over the wall. And the finish was horrible. It was all stippled. I said to them at lunchtime, I said, the wall's got to be smooth, really smooth to the touch, no bubbles, because otherwise, the bugs can get in. And what I didn't realise was that English was their second language. So when I came back after lunch, they had their hands in the paint, putting on there. so sometimes language is a bugger,
Yeah. And sorry, and by you said your daughter's your age, there'll be 100 million.
Yeah.
People which have been treated with those lenses.
Yeah.
Those are cataract lenses. So
yeah. So it's just the technology has advanced enormously. So we originally started making hard lenses, which are made of perspex, but now we make silicone lenses, which are foldable, go in with a smaller incision. But to be fair, these guys have taken, when I went back after 30 years, they had really extended all the stuff that we put in and magnified it by 3 times using their knowledge that they'd learnt on the job. So I can't take the credit for all of the new technology, but certainly they wouldn't have been in production if we hadn't gone there. And what happened was I went to Alcon and said, look, we don't want to make these lenses. We think if you did an own brand version that the Fred Hollows could sell, then that would be ideal. But the Fort Worth, Texas is, or we don't need to do that. We've got all the market, and so we beat them at their own game. So we collapsed the global price in generic lenses from about $360 US down to now it's about $6. And that makes it accessible to the Sherpa.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I've talked about a number of times on this podcast is the equity side of things. Well, not necessarily just equity, but there's going to be a time as technology gets more and more expensive, the number of patients that you can apply it to becomes smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
Or in fact, both by virtue of the technology itself, we get precision medicine, personalised medicine, but also the cost. It's just not feasible. I mean, New Zealand is on the verge of not really having access to it as well, and we're considered first world.
Yeah.
So if you just drop down to the next tier, developing nations to third world or what have you, that becomes even more. The argument is even more stronger of a no.
Well, that's right. And I think, but you've got to, at my stage in the game, what I try and do is find first. There's two things you do. One is you do a failure mode cause risk analysis to see what's the thing that can have the biggest change for the least infrastructure. And one of the things that we've got going in the New Zealand setting is there's a wonderful guy called Romy Noons, and he's invented a system which is an AI system for how you put your gowns and your PPE on. And basically you stand in front of the camera and it tells you what to do. And if you haven't done it up properly, it doesn't allow you to get through into the next part of the gowning procedure. Very, very simple. Yeah. It takes away the risk of one nurse watching another nurse or not doing it correctly. And that can actually, we know from our trials in developing countries that we can reduce hospital-acquired infections by up to 80% by just getting better PPE gowning procedures and also proven antimicrobial solutions for cleaning and equipment and the floors and so on. So very simple things that don't cost a fortune can actually reduce hospital-acquired infections. And that's the largest problem that we have because it takes up bedtime. So I'm looking for those little tricks that we can apply that make healthcare accessible to people. So another product that we developed was the Amigo bars, which is a supplemented food product which is ready to use as a bar, and we got that out through Africa and Asia, and it's got all the essential vitamins and minerals and amino acids that kids need. So if they get one of those a day, then it's better than the found food that their mother's collecting from the hedgerows and boiling up with a bit of rice,
Sure, yeah. Why don't we hear about these interesting stories very much, or these inspiring stories? I mean, this is providing a huge amount of good, having these, like you said, fairly simple interventions, low-cost interventions that have a big impact in these developing countries. I mean, that's a fantastic story. That's a really inspiring thing to hear, that, we live in the first world, shall we say, and people like yourself are still thinking about, the less fortunate globally. What is it? Is it a New Zealand specific thing? Is it just the first world thing that we don't want to?
Well, I think that the world is much more complicated. I often say to people when I was a young boy and I'd sneak in the back of the cinema and watch a John Wayne movie on a Saturday morning, but there was always a good guy and a bad guy, and it was quite simple.
Yeah, black and white.
But now it's not that simple, and we've got a very complicated media strategy, across globally, and some of it's politically motivated, some of it's, when we look at New Zealand, for instance, I think that some research data showed that there was a bias towards the left in all of the reporting in New Zealand, and that's just a cultural thing. And the same thing's true for America, of course. At the time that Trump was getting in, the media was paid for it and to do all these things. And so it's, I think the problem with the healthcare section is that the multinational companies certainly don't want to show that there's a cheaper solution than So, for instance, in New Zealand, for instance, if you go in and have a cataract operation, your lens will probably cost you somewhere around $800. And yet you could buy a Fred Hollows lens, which because they are certified. But what happens is the multinational companies provide the doctors with a free phacoemulsification machine if they buy their lenses. So it's a packaging, marketing thing. So big multinational companies still control what drugs are produced and so on. And it goes right through to agriculture. When I was at Shell Research, I was one of the team that we invented a herbicide that only worked on the Hill reaction of photosynthesis, which meant it had no mammalian toxicity. So it was good for this planet. But it probably won't be marketed in my lifetime because there's more and more patents for other ones that are still in the line.
Oh, wow.
So you know, it's the big pharma, big agricultural stuff. You know.
Whatever it is, industrial complex.
Yeah. So, and that's why there's not a lot of success stories because it's not in the interests of a whole lot of people who've got a finger in the pie. You know.
Well, for you, maybe taking a little bit further back, what tipped it from you from, I mean, you worked at Douglas and you set up the manufacturing there, so that was pharmaceuticals and nutraceuticals. So that was a purely commercial interest. What tipped it for you to move into these kind of charitable pursuits, the Fred Hollows Foundation, Medicine Mondiale, Sir Ray Avery Foundation?
Well, I think it's most of it was formed in Eritrea when I was working there. Where it took us pretty much nearly 3 years to get the lab certified. So I was going backwards and forwards during that time, and there was nothing there. There was no functioning. There was only one table saw in the whole country, you know, and the guy wouldn't lend it to us because he thought his blade would get buggered. So we're hand sawing bits of timber for the roof and all this kind of thing. And what really changed it for me was seeing what you could do for these people and change a whole healthcare system. And then I went down to Keren and we helped design and build their pharmaceutical manufacturing plant, because then they could get access to drugs which they couldn't afford because of the price fixing of the multinational companies. So they were able to make their own drugs. And that's when I really kicked in with the Kaizen group to go into these developing countries and use the skills we had. And we had, my mad team who we just would go in and fix things. And we had a hell of a lot of fun. You know, there was one guy called Vinyl, and we don't know what his name is, and he doesn't know because he's had too much solvent. But Vinyl would arrive at the international departures with a 58 kilogram roller that he'd roll in, and the people would look and say, you can't get that. And all the guys would drop down to their knees with Allen keys and take individual bits off and put it in their carry-on luggage, you know. So we were a magnificent team of guys that believed that we could change the world. Now often they're still doing this work in their own right, putting in air conditioning systems into hospitals and teaching people how to make cheaper drugs and so on. So that was a changing point. I know there was another point too when Fred Hollows was dying. I went to see him on his deathbed, and he said, "Look, Ray, I want you to look after these laboratories and promise me you'll get them built." And I said I would, and he said, "Anyway, stop making money out of bloody sick people, and do something useful in your life." and that probably was at the tipping point where I said, and I proved to myself that I could do it. And once I'd done that, I thought, well, I'll keep on doing it. And what I do now is try and find the next generation of people who are going to articulate these things and say, hopefully, I mean, my daughter's interested in medicine, and maybe she might go on and invent some cool stuff,
Yeah. So it's almost as if you hadn't done that initial trip, hadn't seen it firsthand, and seen the real need there. Maybe the next 40 years would have looked very differently.
Oh, absolutely. I think
you almost couldn't shy away from it because you'd seen it firsthand.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredibly challenging across a whole range of disciplines because at that time, two things happened. The War of Independence, which was 30 years, and I'll repeat that, 30 years long War of Independence. And if you walked down the street, there were people with limbs missing and eyes gouged out and all sorts of things. And in fact, there was one of the tipping points for me was I'd been in Eritrea about 10 days and nothing was working. My hotel had no running water. And I looked at this building that Fred had managed to get, which was a blown up sort of schoolhouse. And I knew that we couldn't build the plant. It was just not going to be possible. So I phoned Gabby Hollows. Fred had died at that stage. And I was going to phone Gabby Hollows to say, you can't do it. There's nobody here. There's no kids on the street above the age of 25. There's all been killed in the war. Blah blah, and everything's broken. And I was in the queue with the only working telephone. You had to go to the post office, and there was a woman in front of me with a shawl wrapped around her and a baby on her back, and the baby started to cry, and the woman next to her helped to unwrap the baby, and when she did so, half of its face was burned to the bone with napalm burn because of the bombing, and I didn't know what to do. I just had never seen the war up front and personal. I went back to the hotel, and there was all these boxes of whiskey, and I said, "Give me a bottle of that, red label whiskey," and the guy got the box down and took it upside down. There was nothing in it. Just like everything was just false and nothing was working. And so I went to my hotel room and thought the best thing I can do is get out of here. This is none of this is fixable. And in the morning I got up and I queued again, and I said to Gabby, "It's going to be bloody near impossible to do it, but I'm going to do it." Because if I hadn't done that little kid wouldn't have had a chance at life. And that was the real pivotal thing, in terms, that was a game changer for the rest of my life, because I knew that I could make a difference.
Yeah. And that, gosh, I mean, would you have been able to look yourself in the mirror had you got on a plane and just come home?
Well, it was two worlds, you see, of course. Yeah. I could have been justified because it was technically impossible at that time. But what we had to do was to import our team, and everything was just bloody hard. I mean, we would put in the air conditioning system, and because of the power fluctuations, it would blow a solenoid, and it would be 2 to 3 months before we could get a solenoid. So I'd say to the guys, "How can we fix it? There must be something in this country where we've got a solenoid we could jury-rig to get it going." And one guy said, "Well, tanks have them." And there's a tank graveyard. There's a tank graveyard, like 16 acres of blown up tanks. So we went down to the tank graveyard and to get one. And we walked across this field. And the manager of the factory at that time, Osiris Fesahai, said to me, "Oh, terribly sorry, Mr. Ray. Inadvertently, I've led you into a minefield. But don't worry. I've been in many minefields, so we will be okay." And it was the longest walk of my life as we were, walking in his footsteps, But we found the solenoid and we got the things working. So everything was like that.
Yeah.
But after that, everything got better. The worst was just trying to get it basically going. But there was a lot of friendship between the Eritreans and the people. In fact, of the 18 guys that we had in Eritrea, 2 of them got married to Eritrean girls. And one of them is now living in Barbados, with an intraocular lens laboratory there. And she was trained in the lab in Eritrea.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely a remarkable story, and I don't think many people can say, in 50 years' time or whatever, 100 million people are going to have something that I was pivotal and involved in and made their lives that much better. So that's remarkable. If we fast forward, and I hope you don't mind us talking about this, but there was quite a bit of a hubbub about 4 years ago, where there was, a few historical things came to light, and there was some fairly nasty, media commentary around yourself and some of your exploits. And, if you were from the outside looking in and you just read those newspaper stories, you wouldn't see all the other things that are going on in the background. And I think we can all say that, no one is ever perfect. Nothing is ever done perfectly. And when you're trying to make things happen, it's
Well, I think that what happened was, and this is... It's what the media can do, that they can take a particular view. But what happened was we had developed a low-cost infant incubator, which we had pilot-scale manufacturing going in India, and we were wanting to go. What we knew from all the lens stories was we needed to get scale. So to do that, people are very reluctant to use new technology, particularly in a developing country setting. They want somebody else to have used it first. But we needed to get. We reckoned we needed to get about 200 incubators out there into certain hospitals in India and Nepal. And so we were planning to do that, and we had arranged. We had the guys at Eden Park give us the Eden Park venue for free, and we had Phil Collins lined up, and we had another series of musicians from New Zealand. Neil Finn was a personal friend, so he was going to do something there, and so it was all ready to rock and roll. But Helen Clark decided that she actually went door knocking and put in objections. So there were so many objections that it would take months to clear, and so basically they had to cancel the concert. Right. But on the back end of that, she was certainly instrumental in revving up the media, because and when some of the media stories came out, she would pop out and say that there's more to come. So she was part of this whole, trying to ruin the brand, as it were, and that's. But the kind of things that would happen is that we have some technology at the moment, which is another thing that we're doing. We've got a good intervention for the domestic violence prevention. So we give the people at risk for a free watch. And basically, if they think they're in trouble, they can push it. We monitor them 24/7. So that's another part of a charity that I've set up called Help at Hand. So we've launched that in Australia and New Zealand. But that technology, we were about to go to market, and the guys at Newsroom published the story saying that the Financial Markets Authority had questions relating to that product. But they actually didn't at all. What happened was they asked questions to the Financial Markets Authority, and they in turn asked us. So it was all. They can do things that make it look like there's something going on.
Yeah, sure.
And that was very, and that really caused. We had a financial controller who looked at. So 2 inquiries were done by Newsroom. Both of them, the Charity Services said there was no improprieties at all with any of our marketing materials or any of the financial things. So we'd not done anything wrong. But it certainly caused 2 of our members to go into almost irreparable mental health problems. So one of them's in a hospital right now, and her decline was she became paranoid that everybody was questioning her financial bookkeeping skills. So it was horrible. It's horrible.
It's a shame, because inflammatory stories really do get eyeballs, right? Like the good story, the wholesome story, the story that's really going to shift the needle in people's health or what have you, that doesn't get the looks. It's just how inflammatory can you be that's going to get the engagement.
I think the other thing is, of course, in New Zealand we do have a tall poppy syndrome, and a good example. One of my great friends and a protege of mine committed suicide because of media harassment. And the issue there was that he had started a startup company, and he had a fire sale. He didn't do anything wrong. It's just that he couldn't travel because of the international, regulations around COVID, and so he couldn't get revenue, and so he sold the business to another agency. But the media response was phenomenal, only because he was described as a dandy, because he always wore, expensive-looking clothes, which he paid for himself, and he was just too much of a show-off. And so when they had a go at him, they actually the headlines were Jake Miller's disappeared, and so has the money. Now Jake went off to Kenya to get away from all of the noise, and then he killed himself in a room alone in Kenya.
So sad.
And New Zealand media did that. Absolutely, the New Zealand media did that. And so we have got a tall poppy syndrome. So they are waiting for the next person to fall over.
And kick them while they're down.
Well, even if you're an All Black coach, if you lose, the next thing is, he should be sacked, And it's not good for our society. It's not good for our society at all.
That's right. I mean, if you know that if you pick your head above the parapet that you're going to get taken down, why would you ever try to elevate yourself?
Well, that's one of the reasons.
Don't the Brits have the crabs in a bucket? Is that like their... I've heard some... I don't know if this is legitimate, but crabs in a bucket seems a lot more like illustrative than tall poppies, pulling each other down as the
Well, the original tall poppy syndrome started in the UK when Mrs. Smith from Number 9 would put up yellow net curtains where everybody else in the street, facing the street, had white ones. So she was up herself, and if her son came back in a jag, then somebody put a coin down it. We inherited all of that, but not only that, we magnified it because we're such a small country.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons that we moved to Australia was because I wanted my daughters to grow up. They're both bullied at school because of the media stuff. And we've got the second highest rate of bullying in schools in the OECD anyway. Yeah. So getting them out. And one of the things that happens in Australia is everybody talks to each other and they have a lot more fun with competition. The equivalent phrase in Australia is "good on you, mate, for having a go." Doesn't matter if you fail. Yeah. Good on you for trying.
Yeah, definitely. We just don't have that here. My wife is South African by heritage. Her family immigrated here when she was 9. And... I mean, it's a bit similar as well. Having a go is trying and not succeeding is not necessarily an abject failure, not something to really poke fun at or pour salt in the wound.
The thing is that failure is inevitably part of any R&D program because you learn what doesn't work and then you modify things. And if you get better at it, so I live my life by failure mode cause risk analysis. That being said, I could never foresee the media shitstorm that would have come out of trying to do something good, like putting on a concert. Because I couldn't imagine anybody wanting to stop a concert going ahead. No. To save millions of babies around the world. But now there's a stigma for the life pod, and also a timing issue. What happened when COVID struck? A manufacturer in India switched all of his production, and he was making other incubators as well. He switched all of that to making ventilators because of the COVID pandemic. Sure. And so it may be another decade before we actually get those incubators going again. And I've got to self-fund it because nobody will fund it now because of all the rubbish that surrounded it. But it's a really clever bit of technology,
Yeah. It's a real shame. I mean, I think I mentioned to you before we started rolling that my perspective is that we really need to celebrate everyone in New Zealand that has a go in high-value industry and technology in particular, because we're not going to maintain our place in the current pecking order in the world and our place as a first-world developed country if we don't have high-value industry. And if we have a social apparatus, let's call it, that is not celebrating people that have a go, is really punishing people for trying and not succeeding or trying and failing, fewer people are going to get involved. And that adds to other systemic issues, which are, brain drain, or breast symbiosis, up and leaving, probably a multitude of reasons. But then if the people that are here aren't comfortable with giving it a go because of the risk of whatever, it's a dangerous place to be in.
Well, it is, and we've done a few blogs to try and articulate it and say we need to try and fix it and celebrate success and celebrate the every week there would be a company in New Zealand that is struggled because of COVID, or there was a company just a couple of days ago that had all their cans leak because they hadn't got the control of quality assurance, but the media went for them and then they go through the whole directors and who's a director, and they try and find somebody to label in some way, and it's not good for our society. I'm trying to reverse engineer that by trying to work with the new government and put in some of these very quick fixes that we can put in and celebrate those things and say, look, we can actually fix some of these things. And we've got good evidence to show that it works. So, and it's interesting. So, a good example, this blue mirror technology is being used in America and the UK in hospitals there, but it's been nearly impossible for him to get into hospitals in New Zealand. And it's because of the system's broken, and there's no, they're all, they're too bothered about what's happening to them just on a daily basis because they're overworked. They know they're not doing the right thing to their patients. The last thing they want to do is introduce anything different or new. So it's going to be a hard task to do it, but I think we can do it because one thing, the magic bullet that we've got is that we know how to work with these people, right back from the clinical staff in developing countries, and we can actually go into those and say, we know what your problems are. We've seen it all before, and we've got some really quick fixes, and let's work as a team. So I'm very passionate about team building, to get things done. So that's going to be my last hurrah in terms of New Zealand's healthcare anyway.
Fantastic. I think if we can have tacit support for entrepreneurism, maybe like more overt support from our country leadership. So I don't like relying on politicians, but have them just overtly say, we are a proud country of entrepreneurs, of thinkers, of people that try, then go get something happening. That would move the needle. But having people that are comfortable sticking their neck out would change the needle even further. Someone mentioned to me in another episode that they said with every failure, we're just growing the knowledge base. So it can only be a good thing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's how we ended up where we are now. We now know that asbestos isn't a great material to put in the skull halls. So we've learned a lot about what to do and what not to do with healthcare. But with the things like the pandemic that we had, the media can have dangerous consequences for whole countries in that. It's just not correct for anybody to be able to say that any institution is the single source of truth regarding science. You can't do that. So a lot of us who had a contrary view of what we should be doing with the process of lockdowns had no voice, and therefore the outcomes that we have, we're still living with. The school attendances are down, poverty's increased. We've got ram raids going, and so there's been a huge degradation in the moral fibre of our society, and it's going to take a lot of time to rebuild it. And we do need, you're quite right, we need some icon heroes to actually go out there and say, no, let's just change it, let's just do it. And that's what I've been doing with the anti-tall poppy stuff, and say no. And of course there are some great people doing it, really calling out the tall poppy stuff, and also there's people like David Latelli, who's doing stuff with helping people not only with food banks but also healthcare interventions at the community level. So we need more of those heroes.
Definitely.
A good friend of mine recently also committed suicide, and Dr. Tom Holland, and he was a great personal friend, and for all intents and purposes, he espoused positivity, but the reality was that everything he was trying to do was very, very, very hard. And then there was a couple of media stories, and he decided that it wasn't good to be around anymore. And so sometimes people pay a huge price for doing those things.
Indeed.
If I'm in Nepal, for instance, somebody will walk up to me in the street and say, "Namaste, you're a god, you fixed my child's eyes." They know who I am. But in New Zealand, somebody's waiting for me to fall over again.
yeah. What a stark contrast that is.
So he's doing it again,
Yeah. Well, Sir Ray Avery, it's been fantastic to have you on today's episode. Thank you so much for your time. If people want to go somewhere to find out more about yourself or your current exploits, or maybe get involved, where can they go?
Well, they can just go onto LinkedIn. That's the easiest one, and find me on LinkedIn. And because basically, I'm using that as a platform to just tell people what we are doing across a range of different projects that we're doing. and also to support other people, and also trying to get a cultural change in New Zealand. Sometimes I get criticised on LinkedIn for not celebrating how happy we all are, and when I look at the social problems that we have, I think if you don't articulate them, you're not going to change them. Yeah. You know, we've got an interesting note about South Africa, because we've almost got a South African system going now where we have the haves and the have-nots, and the big social differences between the people the top 5% who have a particular voice, and then the other people, and this growing amount of people at the other end of the healthcare system that we need to look after, and hopefully, I come back every couple of weeks. Hopefully, we can get some of these things going and make a difference.
Indeed, 100%. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, enjoy the day.